Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Bull Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. My name is Alex, as always, here to talk about a Chargers 27-13 win over the New Orleans Saints. And they get an agenda win over Brandon Staley, who falls to 0-1 as a defensive coordinator. Do the preseason results matter? No. Did I have to get that Schneid comment in? Abso-fucking-lutely. So it was a great Chargers defensive game to see from really all of their rookies who stood out. Jamaree Caldwell getting a lot of run in this game. Eric Rodgers, who we'll talk about in a second. But I have to say, the thing I've been most impressed with in this preseason has been the level of effort and the level of depth that the Chargers have really gotten out of some of these defensive performances. And I think there's no other better place to start than with Oregon's Jamaree Caldwell, who I think has really come on in these two preseason games. Didn't necessarily notice him upon the live viewing of the Hall of Fame game, but went back, watched all 22. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And then I think it was Mr. Theo Ash, friend of the show from Stay Hot Pod, who highlighted a couple more Jamaree plays that really stuck out to me in terms of his ability to, his quick feet, the way he can kind of like almost bounce off of opposing linemen. He never stops moving on the play. Just really positive things that you saw in the first Hall of Fame game. And so this Hall of Fame game, sitting with the live viewing, I was like, all right, I'm going to specifically be keyed in on one Jamaree Caldwell, and he had another great game. Obviously, he gets the sack later on. But that first drive, I think it was, he ends up drawing an offensive holding penalty on the Saints. I think on the same drive, he had a tackle with Jaw Taylor that saved a touchdown, in which, again, his feet just never stop moving on the play. He hustles to be able to make that tackle, which was just absolutely awesome. It's been great to see from him. He's, consistently penetrating, in the backfield. I did not think that this was a player who was going to be able to contribute this much this year. But, again, I hesitate to say it. It's preseason. This is Poona Ford stuff. I do think you've seen why the Chargers drafted Caldwell, and not that they let Poona walk because of Caldwell, but they were really confident, certainly, in this defensive tackle group in the draft. It was a really good DT class in general. And I think from Caldwell, I didn't necessarily see him pop at Oregon the way that others have, but the amount of effort, almost like playing like he's made out of rubber, the quick feet he has, it just feels like he's going to be a very big factor this year, which is something that I think is really good for the Chargers. They really need, again, as many guys to step up in that defensive line room as possible. And to me, he was the best player on the field today. I think you could debate between him and Eric Rodgers and, again, certainly a lot, Caleb Murphy, a lot of defensive players that have impressed. But in terms of what they've shown in the preseason that I think is actually applicable to what they will do in the regular season, I think no one has had a better preseason campaign than Jamaree Caldwell so far on this team. Eric Rodgers is, again, the next name to talk about. Unfortunately, suffered an ankle injury, but it felt like, he got, obviously, the pick six, which he read a really good truck ball. The Hainer ball, he got a pick on later in the game, and also had a PBU, I think, at some point in the fourth quarter. Former Rutgers corner, we love Rutgers on the show, former Rutgers alumni, obviously, as many people know. So it was fun to see Eric have a really good game. For those that don't know, he was the opposite corner to Robert Longerbeam last year after Max Melton had gone into the 2024 draft. Primarily played special teams in 2023 and stuff like that until 2024, when he really had to step up in that opposite corner role and did pretty well. Had a few highlight plays at Rutgers. I think he also had a pick six against Howard. So he has created these pick opportunities and pick six opportunities in college as well. And you saw the break on the ball, certainly, that he had today. It was interesting because I thought earlier in the game he did get beat I forget by who it was exactly, but they kind of tried to keep throwing it to Rodgers again as soon as Dean Leonard came out of the game, and throw it on Triquez and some of the other corners that were in. And for the most part, I thought Rodgers and who else? Mickens obviously early in the game responded really well, but I thought you had, again, Miles Purchase, who, as we saw last week, was pretty good in this one. I thought you had Olodokun, who flashed a little bit in this one as well. So just the depth, to me, that they have at cornerback, and the fact that they spent these 4 UDFA contracts on corners for a reason, and all of them, including Nico Reed, who didn't even play in this game, have been really, really good. And so I don't know if Rodgers is a guy that I would talk about necessarily making the roster, but he has certainly put his ring in the hat for the practice squad based off of this performance. I think his ability to read and react on the ball is special. Yes, you could argue both the Shuck and the Hainer passes were a little bit telegraphed for him to be able to get those turnovers. Not saying that this is elite play we're witnessing in the preseason from these quarterbacks, but I think the athleticism and, again, the break that he showed on both of those plays, the urgency to kind of dive back and get the interception on the second one, I think has been really solid for him. And unfortunate that he did seemingly injure his ankle in some way, whether that's a sprain, whether that's torn ligaments and stuff. We'll find out exactly what it. Actually, we probably won't find out exactly what it is because they won't tell us. But he was on crutches after the game. Worth noting. Hopefully he's able to play in one of these last 2 preseason games. Kind of doubting it based on the fact that he was on crutches after the game, but you never know. Maybe if the ankle heals better than expected. I guess we'll see exactly what the damage is on that. But really, really impressive game from Eric Rodgers, Rutgers legend, who has thrown his hat into the ring, as I said, for one of those practice squad spots. And just a credit to Minter and the scouting staff who've been able to find these guys like Nico Reed, Eric Rodgers, Purchase, who have really showed out both in training camp and in the preseason to this point. My next star of the game would have to go to one Caleb Murphy, who is, again, not someone that I expected to talk about a ton this preseason. I thought, this preseason would be a little bit more of the Kyle Kennard show. Obviously didn't play today. I think due to an injury. Wasn't super impressive last week, but Caleb Murphy has really stole the show as far as the edge room's concerned, playing the run fairly well, but his pass rush chops that he showed today are just something that, I don't think the Chargers can leave off of their 53-man roster. I think they hoped Kyle Kennard would be a little further along than he demonstrated he was last week, but in a competition of hey, are you going to keep 4? Are you going to keep 5? We'll see exactly what they end up doing. I can't imagine they cut a 4th-round pick. I really don't think that's on the table. But, I do think we have to have some conversations about, is this, if you're trying to put the best, 4 edges consistently on the field, Caleb Murphy is right now part of that group. So does that necessitate you keeping 5 edges? Obviously, that'll be something that we talk about closer to roster cut down and stuff like that. But again, the depth that they have on defense in the secondary, in the edge room in particular, even DTs down the roster who have been impressing, really good. And it feels like they have nailed some of their undrafted picks pretty well on the defensive side of the ball. And Caleb Murphy, a guy who was primarily a special teams rotator last year at Ferris State, as Alex Katzen says in our Discord, he was a demon pass rusher there, and certainly in this preseason with the Chargers has shown why he deserves to be kept. A couple guys that were active on defense, Emily Johnson had 10 tackles, Marlon Wax I thought was pretty active in this game as well. Arjun Mickens I thought was really impressive and also brings up some roster questions that I'll get to in a second. But with Mickens, he had 8 tackles today, a tackle for loss, as well as a pass breakup. And I think, especially after he had the almost shoestring tackle in the Hall of Fame game that saved a touchdown after someone else missed the tackle, he's been everything that they've asked of and more. Tony Jefferson really stuck with me at the podium, just how highly he talked about Mickens and watching his film, particularly after the Chargers drafted him. I don't know how he fell to the 6th round. I certainly had a higher opinion on him in the draft than, where he ended up going. But to me, Mickens has really shown why he, deserved to get drafted, of course, but also fits into this safety rotation, which really does bring up the question of, I just talked about keeping 5 edges. I've talked about keeping like 18 corners, some on the practice squad. How are they going to do this roster is one of the questions that, again, continues to stick out to me because I really wonder if they're going to have the ability that they did last year, which whenever they kept 4 safeties, Tony Jefferson traditionally wasn't in that group. And they had the luxury last year to be able to elevate him on the practice squad, which, by the way, shout out to Uncle Tony, who, again, had a great game, who I'm sure he'll show up in the PFF grades on the top of those again. He looked great out there today too in the brief preseason he played relative to last week's effort. So, but I wonder whether they're going to have again the luxury to play the roster games that they did with Tony Jefferson last year, especially now that he, second year out of retirement, is more of a known quantity in terms of like, okay, this is what you're getting if you sign Tony Jefferson. So I am going to be interested to see how they maneuver, again, this final roster. I assume they'll keep 4 and maybe take their chances cutting Tony. Because you probably, again, I don't think you can cut Mickens just by proxy right now. But we'll see how that plays out. But I think both Mickens and Tony have been really, really good at this stage in the preseason. Some takeaways on the defensive side of the ball. Not a great game for Triquez Bridges, who I think, let me pull up the final count on what Triquez ended up doing. But he had 5 catches against him for 6 targets, 98 yards, and a touchdown. Not exactly what you want. He's one of the guys that I think has been picked on in practice, but has also had his fine moments in practices too. I think they hoped he would be a little further along than he has been to this point. Tarkib, mentioning the starting guys in particular, who I think really stuck out to me early in this game. Tarkib had a great tackle that I think like blew up kind of like almost a screen design. Deshaun Hand had a huge QB hit. Naquan Jones, I thought, had a really, really positive game today. So even though we've mostly been talking about some of the backups and the guys that have been involved, in the later stages of these games, I do think the brief time that the starters have played, the defenses look pretty good. So shout out to them and all that they've done. Obviously, you're not going to see Derwin and Khalil Mack and all those guys in the preseason, but I think the starters that are going to be key contributors and guys like Still and Hand and guys Naquan Jones, who's going to be obviously a first team, second team defensive tackle in terms of the rotations. I thought all of those guys looked really good. And obviously Tony Jefferson, not necessarily a first-team guy with the 3 safeties they have on the roster, but again, another vet presence that I thought was a really impressive performance in this game. So shout out to Eric Rogers. Shout out to Jamaree Caldwell. I think I did a 5 stars of the game bit on Twitter where I basically handed out, my top 5 players from that game. And for me, it was Jamaree Caldwell, who was number 1, Eric Rogers, who was number 2, Caleb Murphy. Kind of the third name that I threw in there on that post. 4 of my guys, including RJ Mickens, who I talked about, obviously, those were sort of my defensive stalwarts to sort of mention. I thought that they played really, really well today. I had 1 offensive star, and that was Trey Lance, who we'll get into in a little bit. But I thought really, really great day for the defense all around. And I don't remember a Chargers defense that had quite this level of depth on it that is making, the cuts and the stuff they'll have to get to by cut down day really difficult. Not as great of a day for the offense. Particularly, I think early in that game, Heineke, as well as the offensive line, were pretty rough. Heineke had like 3 misses that I saw, 2 overthrows to tight ends, as well as 1 pass where he missed Kamani Vidal by like 8 yards. Harbaugh also took a little bit of a different tone in the preseason, post-game presser. Not necessarily that I make a ton out of this, but Harbaugh was kind of like, I'm not going to talk about the quarterback battle after kind of, saying last week that, Heineke was your it was a competition, but saying Heineke was the vet, Trey Lance needs the reps. His tone was a little bit different this week, in my opinion, at the podium discussing these performances. And I thought Heineke really did not look great. They traded for him last year, obviously, after Easton Stick had the preseason that he did. That's not a trade that I would take back, by the way. Like, I know people talk about giving up that pick, but Easton Stick was truly unfathomably bad last preseason, and they could not go into him as the QB2 to Justin Herbert, to where it necessitated bringing someone else in. So, like, to me, I don't think any differently of that trade, even if Taylor Heineke is struggling a little bit in the practices and some of the preseason. But again, the story of the preseason for QB2 has to be Trey Lance. And when Steven went to practice on the 28th, he told us, and he was like, yeah, I think Trey Lance is the QB2. I think he has the edge right now in this quarterback room. Even if Heineke is getting more of the QB2 reps, I think Lance is going to show it in the preseason. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't necessarily have the most faith in Lance, I think, from when he was originally signed, just based off of what we've seen last preseason in Dallas in particular. But Lance has played really, really well. I didn't think this game was quite as good as his passing effort last week, but obviously he was able to do some damage with his legs, and I thought was clearly the best quarterback on the field today, other than DJ Uiagalelei's one pass to Dalvin Campbell, which was great. But in terms of this QB2 battle between Lance and Heineke, it's hard to really argue that it's been Lance. Again, pretty good passer, able to do things with his legs when he's asked. And I just think when it comes down to it, in a Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh, who do you trust type situation to throw out there if there is an injury to Justin Herbert, so far in these two games, it really does have to be Trey Lance, who I just think has had better command of the offense. Not that he's made every single play that he's had to make, but I think has done plenty enough to win that quarterback job. And I think if you're talking about reducing this to like a kind of bare bones offense almost without Justin Herbert in the case of an injury, I trust Trey Lance more in that regard too, because I think what you've really seen from him is, again, the ability to take your rush lanes when they're there. Yes, his tendency is going to be tucking it more than dropping back in the pocket and throwing it, but I think he's had a better, keen sense of just controlling the tempo, controlling the game, both in practices that's been reported and these two preseason games so far. Obviously, Heineke didn't play in the Hall of Fame game, but it's advantage Trey Lance right now, and it's really his job to lose. My other offensive takeaway is all of these running backs are awesome. I love talking about running backs. I am the day 3 running back guy. I thought everyone was great yesterday. Kimani Vidal, on the stat sheet, it won't look good. He had 6 carries for 16 yards. He also got killed by Josh Kaltenberger for an 8-yard loss. So his stats don't really count today. But he had a really good first half, really solid runs in there. And I think Heineke missed him again on that throw by like 8 yards. He's locked up RB3 if you've looked at what he did at particularly last game, what he's done in the preseason. I think they allowed Hines and Rocket Sanders, Haskins to really get some reps after him. I don't think Vidal played after the third quarter very much. So to me, he's clear clubhouse leader post after Hampton and I guess after Harris for that RB3 job. Obviously, the big storyline will be waiting to see whether Harris plays in that first week against the Chiefs. If not, that opens up another spot for some of these guys that we're going to talk about. Naheem Miller-Hines. The story of this game for him will probably be, again, the box score is not super favorable to him. The 2 muff punts. He had 2 awesome blocks today that absolutely, on blitz pickups, that opened up opportunities for Trey Lance to run that I thought were just worth mentioning. I don't think he really has a shot at the roster, especially if they probably prioritize Rocket Sanders a little bit over him after what he was able to show today. But I thought, he's probably not going to get a ton of love because of the 2 muff punts. I thought he threw some awesome blocks today, and still, he has a little wiggle when he runs. He's still able, he had a good run last week where he turned what should have been probably like a 2-yard loss and like a 10 or 11-yard gain. He had another one of those kind of like wiggle runs again today where he was able to make a defender miss. I thought he's been really good. Haskins, steadying force this preseason. I think he's probably on the roster no matter what, just as a result of how much they trust him as a special teams guy, as a blocker. Michigan, obviously, to some extent. But he, I thought, has been really good at running the ball this preseason. I think he's probably your prototypical RB4 right now if you're keeping Hampton, Harris, Vidal, and then I think Haskins is probably your fourth guy at this point. Really solid all-around back. I feel like he's been really deliberate with his runs, not necessarily that he's the most explosive guy or that he's going to make stuff happen in that regard, but or the fastest. But I think that he has shown a greater attention to detail in purely as a runner compared to when we saw him as a runner last year. Raheem Sanders obviously has the big touchdown, the big 14-yard touchdown. He had a couple other good runs in there. Not all the runs were great. Some were just killed because the offensive line wasn't great. There was one where I think he got Rapp taken down early, where he just didn't have like the speed to get out of there. But again, the touchdown run, the physical runs, the body blows he was giving out, really great stuff to see. I don't, even though he is my day 3 guy from the draft this year, I absolutely love Raheem Sanders. I don't really see a spot for him on the roster unless he goes absolutely nuclear in these first 2 preseason games because of the time he missed early in camp and the fact that he's not really like a special teams blocking guy in the same way that they're going to trust Haskins to do that they're going to trust Vidal to do some of that. Miller Hines obviously threw some blocks today. So I'll be very curious to see, because if you're keeping an RB4, you're not really keeping, or if you're keeping a 4th running back, you're not keeping a guy who's necessarily like getting volume of the offense, right, relative to what Hampton and Harris are going to do. So I do think they really have to be involved in that special teams and those phases of the game. And because Haskins was injured and because, we'll see if he gets involved with that in any sense in practice this week. But I think this was a really positive showing in terms of his chances to make the practice squad. I don't see him personally making the roster just because I think the other guys have been more consistently involved in the other phases of the game outside of offense in camp in the preseason so far. But very, very positive effort for Raheem Sanders, who I think showed why the Chargers were so interested in him as an undrafted free agent. His explosiveness really does show off. So they have tough decisions to make in the running back room. I think if you put a gun to my head today, my thought would be to do Hampton, Harris, Vidal, Haskins. And then if Harris can't go, which is obviously a distinct possibility with him being on the NFI list for week 1, then I think I would go Hampton, Vidal, Haskins, and then probably Rocket Sanders. But I think you can really debate that last spot between Rocket Sanders and Nyheim Hines, who I think has had some standout moments. He's also had some rough ones, to be fair. Receiving. Not a ton to talk about here. Like, I think Arande was pretty good. He had 2 catches today. Dalvin Campbell obviously really showed out on that deep pass from DJ Uiagalelei. And he is really pushing for that practice squad spot between him and Rager and Jaquay Jackson and some of these other guys. I hope that he's able to kind of get it. And he's been pretty involved in these practices, pretty involved in the games, has really showed a progression throughout this OTAs and minicamp period to what he's showing now in the preseason. Brendan Rice had a catch today. Raheem Sanders had a nice catch today where he kind of like readjusted on a Trey Lance ball, I think. And Trey Lance actually a good adjustment by him as well in terms of kind of making it like almost like a back shoulder throw so that he could put it in position for Sanders to go get it, even though he didn't necessarily win on his route. But really nice connection between those two. The story of this game, probably from a negative standpoint, will be Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Harris, who didn't really get on the score sheet. KLS having a drop from Taylor Heineke. That was more on KLS than it was Heineke, unfortunately. And then Trey Harris obviously kind of putting up a goose egg tonight. There will be some concern in the fan base amongst Trey Harris, and in terms of what is his involvement in this offense going to be. I'm not at that point yet with Trey. I'd like to see something in these last 2 preseason games. I don't know how much he's going to play in these last 2 preseason games, especially the last one. given that they, tend to give it towards, the guys who are on the brink of making the roster, particularly that last final fourth preseason game, more so than guys like Harris and KLS who are roster locks. I would like to see a little bit more. Again, we've seen very positive things from him in practice. We've also seen drops from him in practice. The same thing with KLS, who's had some drops but has been awesome in practice, awesome in the Hall of Fame game last week. Would love to see one really clean performance from both of them in the same game, just to have a certain level of comfort heading into that game against the Chiefs. But again, not necessarily worried about either of them. I guess I'll see more of each of their reps when I watch the All-22 today, whenever that comes out. But ultimately, not much of a concern for me in that regard. But yeah, I thought this was a really fun game to watch. I think for me, the standout guys were, of course, Jamaree Caldwell that I talked about. Eric Rogers, obviously, was great. Caleb Murphy. For me, if I'm thinking of guys from this preseason who have really asserted themselves throughout these first 2 weeks, I think you have to start with Trey Lance, who has given himself the QB2 job. Nico Reed and Eric Rogers, who, keep performing, keep showing those the breaks on the ball that they've been able to have. Really active on defense for both of them, too. Jamaree Caldwell, who I think has been kind of star of the preseason, so to speak, and now you're starting to see really all of the running backs perform particularly at a high level in both of these preseason games. I think that whole room has just been awesome to watch, both with the Lions game as well as this most recent Saints game. So that was kind of my thoughts on this preseason game. Really nice effort to see. I'll probably go back and watch the film. A couple other notes just to talk about here. Prayers for Rashawn Slater, who obviously got injured at practice earlier this week and has injured ruptured patella tendon, will be out for the season. Trey Pipkins will try to stand up in his absence at right tackle. They kick Joe Alt to left tackle. And yeah, it is an absolute blow for the team. In terms of what, for me, their ceiling was. I think they can still be good enough with Pipkins at right tackle, or at least Pipkins at right tackle over, right guard last year. I think he is still a pretty good fit with what we've seen from him at right tackle in the past. But a blow for a Chargers room that was expecting, hey, this is where the running game leap comes, and to not have your two bookend tackles kind of be involved in that with how great Slater is in the run game. With the level I think Alt could push to in year 2 as well. A little bit of a bummer in that regard, especially with the interior offensive line looking so far in this stage of the preseason and what we've heard about it in training camp. So prayers to Rashawn. I saw a lot of stuff online where people do the thing where, oh, well, he has money and, he got the contract that he wanted and all that kind of stuff. And to be honest, I think that you don't know the kind of psycho competitor that you have to be Rashawn Slater at this level if you think that he's not heartbroken, about the season and, what he's done for this, not being able to contribute this season for this team. And just prayers to Rashawn, and I hope he really is able to come back from that torn patella tendon in the amount of time that guys like Trey Pipkins and Joe Alt say that they think he will. To be fair, I did also see a lot of discussion about the torn patella tendon. Like, I do think that's a much better surgery and recovery than it was 10 years ago, where a lot of that data about, players never coming back comes from. Chargers have someone like Otito Ogbonya on the team who recovered quite well from it and has been, playing well to this point in camp and the preseason. So, I don't think it's necessarily, the death sentence it's been made out to be on Twitter. Although, yes, probably the worst kind of knee injury you can have in football, and unfortunate for Sean. Keenan's back. He was on the sideline. We saw him obviously chopping it up with Herbert and Lam McConkey. Been nice to see him back in practice, and it's nice to see that the front office was proactive. I think I talked about, losing Mike Williams on our early episode of Bolt Breakdowns, and the idea that you kind of had to find a way to replace him and replace his production with someone that's more proven. And I think getting Keenan Allen back in the building is a start to that. Not that he's necessarily going to do the X receiver things that Mike Williams would have done, but I think you've seen enough from KLS, from Trey, to kind of like be confident in placing them there. Also, Keenan's not ineligible to play the outside, certainly. But nice that they got him back for the contract that they got him on, $8.52 million. Perfectly reasonable value. We'll see what the final numbers on that contract end up being in terms of the guarantees and incentives. I don't think that's actually been reported yet. But nice to see Keenan back in the building. Training camp is now over. We are officially on towards, basically 3 weeks until the regular season. A couple storylines that I will be watching for the remainder of the preseason and just the remainder of these practices. Hope Trey Harris can get some positive momentum, as we've talked about. I hope they really settle on this interior offensive line and have more confidence in it than I think they do right now, and certainly than I think the fan base has in the interior offensive line right now. But, I hope they keep battling on defense, having some of these competitions. It's been really fun to watch so far this preseason. So that'll do it for me today on this episode of Bolt Breakdown. So bolt up. See you guys next time. Brandon Staley, again, 0-1 as the defensive coordinator. Go fuck yourself.